Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, we are going to be talking about the Pat Mcgrath Mothership Mega Celestial Odyssey palette. So this is another one of my holiday 2021 review video. I'm doing like 4 or 5 of these for the holiday palettes that I purchased for this year, and I wanted to do a thorough review in case you wanted to put these items into your holiday wish list this coming Christmas, because this palette is beautiful. This is an 18 pan eyeshadow palette that includes 4 mattes and then 14 shimmers. This palette cost $78, and you're probably thinking that's a lot of money for an eyeshadow palette, but this is Pat Mcgrath and her eyeshadows are really quite expensive, so you are getting a really good value with this eyeshadow palette because her regular eyeshadow palette only includes 10 eyeshadows, and these retail for about $125, and that's a lot. I only have one of them, and this was gifted, so I normally would not spend $125 on an eyeshadow palette. This palette is actually really beautiful, and basically the whole packaging of this is just super luxe, and that's a lot of where the $125 is coming from. So you're getting 8 more eyeshadows with this palette, and it's huge, and you have the Pat Mcgrath quality eyeshadows. If you purchased last year's eyeshadow palette, I thought this was a really good deal already because it was $78, but this year they really took it up a notch. This palette, the packaging is a little bit bigger, but the eyeshadows are about the same size, and this is much improved packaging for a Pat Mcgrath. I know last year when the Celestial Divinity eyeshadow palette released, people were saying, you know, you do get the eyeshadow palette, but for Pat Mcgrath, this packaging was just not really to standard because it's just cardboard. It does have a mirror, but everything else as far as the packaging of this palette just seemed cheap compared to actually this year's. This year's, it's so nice. Packaging is absolutely beautiful, and the whole construction of it is a lot more sturdy and just feels more luxe compared to last year's. So if you compare it as far as like placement wise, it does come with the mirror as well, but having the eyeshadows in this like black acrylic feels so much more high-end and more luxe, and more of a quality and presentation of what you would expect for a Pat Mcgrath palette compared to last year's. Last year's palette packaging just seems so plain, and you really feel like you're getting your $78 worth of eyeshadows when it's packaged this way, and I love that. So as far as looking at the shades in here, the 4 matte eyeshadows in this palette is actually so beautiful. They feel so smooth and they apply so nicely on the lid. Compared to last year's palette, there was only 3 matte eyeshadows in that palette, and this year's palette has 4, and they're super smooth. They actually feel a lot smoother than last year's palette. This year's shimmers are out of this world. Last year's palette is more leaned towards more purple. This year's palette is actually so fun. There's just so much going on. There's so many colors, but if you want to do some neutral looks, you have that option as well, which is so nice and versatile. There's only one eyeshadow in here that I had a difficulty working with because there's just so much fallout. It's the shade called Galactic Glow, and this eyeshadow is just so messy, and probably that's the only thing that I would grade like a C- out of all the eyeshadows in this palette, because that one's just so messy. It's so hard to work with, and so you really have to watch out when you're applying that eyeshadow. For the most part, I think the color story of this eyeshadow palette is so stunning, and each eyeshadow performs so well. If you own last year's palette and if you're worried that you have shades that are repetitive, I compared 5 eyeshadows that look similar in the pan from last year's palette and this year's palette, and you don't get exact shades at all, so you don't really get any repetitive shades. Maybe the gold shade, the really bright gold, probably is the closest thing that would be a repetitive shade. Shadows are pretty similar, but for the most part, every other shade in here is very different from last year's palette. I love that there's different textures in the eyeshadows in here as well. You have a couple of satin eyeshadows, so it's nice for a more toned down look, and the shimmers are super shimmery. There's one eyeshadow in here that's so gorgeous. It's like a taupe eyeshadow that has a different texture. It almost has kind of like a spongy texture, and everything else is just your traditional pressed eyeshadow, and they feel so nice and pigmented. These shimmer shadows have that foiled feeling when you swatch them with your fingers, and they do apply better when your fingers, and that's what I did for this look today. I did film a tutorial with this eye look, and I have another one, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna put it all together for the end of this video. So if you wanted to go ahead and watch that, I'll have it at the end of the video so you can see how the eyeshadows perform on my eyes. So as far as conclusion, if you're in the market for another eyeshadow palette, I mean, it's a beautiful eyeshadow palette to include in your Sephora wish list or for your Christmas wish list this coming holiday. I think it's a beautiful palette. I think you get a lot of eyeshadows for a Pat Mcgrath palette. I think this is a good value because Pat Mcgrath shadows are very, very expensive. So anyways, that is all for this review. I hope you guys found this helpful, and if you wanted to stick around, the tutorial for this eye look is coming up next, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!